KCYBLP 103.5 FM is Cypress Radio. Cypress.
Live from Cypress, Texas, you've tuned into the Special Ed Section 504 Radio Hour. And I'm your host, Louis Geigerman from NARDA.org. Last week I opened the show with baseball, and guess what? I'm going to do it again. The Houston Astros continue to be in the first place in the American League West Division by 2.5 games over the Los Angeles Angels, or the Anaheim Angels, I guess that's what they are today. And they're still 5 games ahead of the Texas Rangers. They're the team I'm a little concerned about. But I'm an unabashed fan of the Astros, so go Astros. Last couple of weeks, I've been talking about the Sugar Land, Texas Kids baseball team for special needs, known as the Dream League, that allows kids with all types of physical and cognitive impairments to just play the game and enjoy it. The team has been honored by being asked to play an exhibition game prior to the start of the international final of the Little League World Series in Williamsport, PA, which is happening in 2 weeks. They'll be playing they're scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern Time on August 29th. Now, the team has raised over $100,000, which is remarkable to send the athletes, their families, and the angels that assist the players in playing the game to go to Williamsport. ESPN has sold the rights to broadcast the game to the local PBS affiliate, WVIA. Now, WVIA is going to televise a game up in Williamsport, but they wanted to share the game here locally in Houston with KUHT, the Houston PBS affiliate, so they can broadcast a game here. Now, despite numerous attempts to contact KUHT about taking those rights and televising it, the station has turned a cold shoulder and has not returned phone calls regarding the request. It is time for KUHT to be called out about this. I'm asking all of you, if you haven't done it, please do it, and if you have done it, do it again. I want you to call, and I'm telling you, anybody that's listening to the show, even if you're not in the Houston area, call them anyway. I want you to call the KUHT switchboard at 713-748-8888. Once again, 713-748-8888. And let them know that you want the team to play and you want them to televise the game. And I want you to also send them an email through their website at www.houstonpublicmedia.org, houstonpublicmedia.org/contact, and tell them that you want it on there. Now, when you send that email, tell them that you want it on there and you think it's outrageous that they're not doing this, and ask that you have that email. Be sure you tell them to please put this email in their FCC file. Again, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's absolutely deplorable that KUHT is not televising this event here in the local market for these deserving kids. Shame on Channel 8. Just shame on them. Once again, please call the switchboard at Channel 8 and tell them that you want the Dream League game to be televised on August 29th at 11 a.m. And, well, it's actually 10 a.m. Central. And, again, their phone number there is 713-748-8888. Before we get to our guest today, there's one other thing I want to touch on. The first show, we had a conversation that was remarkable, talking about the camera bill that we passed in this recent session of the legislature to place cameras in the self-contained special ed classrooms. We had a party in celebration of this event over at Maggie Suter's house, and I want to thank publicly Maggie Suter for hosting the event, and Raphael for hosting the event. It was remarkable. Brigitte Rideau and her band came down from Fort Worth to play, and they're wonderful. By the way, if you're in the Fort Worth area on a Saturday night, she does a gig there just about every Saturday night at the Sheraton Fort Worth, and she's wonderful. Anyway, it was just a magical night. It was some wonderful speeches. The Lieutenant Governor was there, Lieutenant Governor Patrick. Symphonia Thompson was there. Representative Jim Murphy was there. And Greg Grugan, who was my co-host in the first show. The Lieutenant Governor was so kind, and he gave the pen that the governor used to sign the legislation, he gave it to Greg. And it was well deserved, because Greg had a major part in televising and putting a face to it on television, which really captured the interest in the heart of the Lieutenant Governor. It was just incredible. What was neat, though, when Brigitte was singing and doing her was playing with her group, the Lieutenant Governor was listening intently, and he said, "Man, I didn't know that you were that good." I mean, Brigitte is a Grammy Award nominee jazz singer, and she's wonderful, as I said. Anyway, he had no idea of it, but he mentioned to her that, I play a little guitar. And then she said, "Well, why don't you come in and sit in with us?" And he did, and he was great. It was just, they did a rendition of Lucille. It was just fantastic. So anyway, it was a wonderful evening. Everybody left. It was just, everybody came together, and it was just a really good, feel-good night. That's kind of that's in the special ed world, having a feel-good night is something really good to have. So, once again, my hat's off to everybody, and appreciate everything that everybody did that was involved with it. And Maggie, thanks for hosting the event. Okay, we're going to start the show now. Today, I've got my friend Sidney Wohlman, and Sidney Wohlman has works with my firm, narda.org. He was a former school teacher. He taught Sunday school for, was it how many years did you do that?
23 years.
23 years he taught Sunday school. Amazing. And, of course, he holds a teaching license here in Texas. Always had a love for teaching. And so, anyway, he became an advocate. He also is a tutor called Education Sidney. And he's a phenomenal tutor, which we're going to talk about that. But anyway, remarkable guy. Actually, he was in radio when he was younger.
Used to be a disc jockey on KRBE when it was a classical station owned by Roland Baker Enterprises. And that's where I cut my teeth in radio, and this is my first time back in a long, long time.
Well, I think we're certainly understanding of it, and we're gentle for those doing a coming back or going a reentry back into it, and I know everything will be great. Well, Sidney, I want to welcome you to the Special Ed Section 504 Radio Hour.
Thank you very much. We're going to be talking a lot about special education, and toward the end of the show, as I understand it, I'm going to be giving a little précis on how I tutor and the way I work that as well. And so at that point, I think we should get started, Louis.
I think you're right, Sidney. Let's do it. All right. The first thing we're going to talk about is parents are equal partners in education planning. Let's talk about for a moment in scheduling IEP meetings, the times and dates of the IEP meetings. How should the districts be working with you when you're actually planning a date? Many parents think that we get a date, we have to adhere to the date they tell you about. That they say, hey, you're going to have a IEP meeting on Thursday the 8th. Let's talk about that.
Well, the truth is that if Thursday the 8th at 8 p.m. or 3 p.m. is not convenient for you, you have the right to request other dates. And they also have to accommodate anyone that you'd like to invite to the meeting, whether it's a relative or an outside expert that you want to be along with you, as long as you tell them in advance that they're coming. So it's not they choose the date and time and you go at their convenience. It's got to be done at the convenience of everyone because, as we'll get to later, everyone in the room is an equal partner in the education of your child.
The word, I think the phrase that's most important and that's mentioned in special ed law is it has to be a mutually collaborative scheduling of the meeting. So it's not like it's one day, take it or leave it.
And that's absolutely true. And so many parents think that all of these things, all of the arrangements behind an IEP meeting and even follow-up or subsequent meetings are at the discretion of the district. And the fact of the matter is it's really supposed to be collaborative, where everyone's in the room at the right time. And, of course, you have to make some concessions sometimes as well in terms of times. What I often tell the parents that I work with is when they know that there's an IEP meeting coming up, I tell them, ask the district to get us 2 or 3 dates or times so that it's easy for us to pick the ones that are just absolutely not possible, and then make available those times that we are available.
The times, though, that there are instances where it's not quite as flexible, but they still can't say one day, take it or leave it, is when there's a manifestation determination review. Those got to be closer to the date that they're actually, that the event actually took place. I mean, putting it off for a month, that's not going to fly. But again, one day, take it or leave it, that's not being reasonable.
Yeah, and of course, a manifestation, the child has done something, or the district says the child has done something that has to be addressed immediately. It's not something you can wait on for 6 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, so the whole message here, when they say, here's a date, that's not set in stone. I mean, it needs to be, you as an equal stakeholder need to be included. They need to work with you. And to keep that in mind also, there are other ways to participate as well. You can do that by telephone, okay? There are even times, you can do it by telephone. They also need to take into account your work schedule. Now, if somebody is on a shift schedule, hey, sometimes it may mean that you need an evening an art. Well, if you're not able to get off work to do this, they need to be flexible enough to make an attempt to work with you. But you'll need to show that if you're working shift work that you can't do that, and But they need to be reasonable that you may not necessarily be able to do things between 8 o'clock and 3 o'clock or 8 o'clock and 4 o'clock.
And without belaboring the point, it's also important if you're working shifts. There's often a situation where you have a certain day every week that is your day off, so to speak, and you're totally available on that day. And if the district knows in advance that every Wednesday or every other Wednesday you definitely can make it, then that's something you need to let them know in advance so that when they go to pick a date for you, for your child's IEP meeting, then it's a date that has no conflict for you in terms of making a living.
And most districts will take a position as well about the who comes to the meeting, in that if you bring counsel, they'll want to bring counsel. Although here in the Houston area, if they bring me, and sometimes Sidney, they'll always want to be sure that they have their attorney there. I guess that's just to make it fair for them. So, but you still need to let them know in advance. So who's going to be there, and so they can have the right people there for them.
Well, and one other thing on this. Actually, I'm delighted when a district decides to bring an attorney in, because the attorney's going to know more than I do about what the law says, and there's less likelihood that things are going to go in a way that doesn't agree with what the law says. And we can get the kid educated rather than having to file all kinds of legal things to stop them from doing things that aren't appropriate for your child.
Well, actually, what I find is that they certainly know more than the school staff, and a lot of times, as you said, they're some of the things that schools may be doing may not necessarily be following the rules that they need to, and the attorneys will try to keep them more in line because that's what they're being paid to do is try to keep them out of litigation as opposed to in litigation. All right, so let's move on to the next issue. If parents agree with any part of the ARD committee's decision, they must sign agree, even though they may
I think you mean disagree.
I'm sorry, they must sign disagree. You're right. They must sign disagree, even though they may allow the parts that they agree to proceed. Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about when parents, if you don't agree in a meeting, on any part of what occurred in the IEP meeting, what should you do? I mean, at the end, what should you do? Should you mark what box should you mark?
Well, the truth is, if you disagree with something that's going on in the meeting, it becomes a point of disagreement, and whether you agree with everything except that one item, you must sign disagree, or they're going to proceed no longer than 5 school days afterwards with the thing you disagree with. So when you disagree, you open up the possibility of some kind of a compromise or a change in attitude by the school district.
Right. There's 2 scenarios here. Okay, if you can agree with some of the things that are done and disagree with other things. Okay, it's unfortunately there seems to be a misunderstanding with administrators. They haven't been taught really what the rules are. You can agree with some of it and disagree with other parts of it. It's not all or nothing. It's not all or nothing. Now, I can't speak for every state, but in Texas they have a different rule here, and that is let's say that you have a disagreement in the ARD meeting, and at that ARD meeting you end up disagreeing. They give you an option once you sign off disagree. What's that option, Sidney? What happens if you have a disagreement?
Well, the first thing they're going to offer you is called a 10-day, I call it the 10-day free look, but it's actually a 10-day reconvene meeting where everyone goes out and leaves the meeting and reconsiders everything and possibly comes to a compromise. And no longer than 10 school days, usually no longer than 10 school days, although that's been liberalized a bit.
Right.
The meeting, people in the meeting get back together and see whether anything's changed. If they're willing to compromise and agree to some part of, or make a compromise with you, or even give you what you've been asking for.
Well, it's funny. You use the 10-day free look. That's from your insurance days.
That's right.
I remember that, too. We both used to be in the insurance business years ago. Anyway, but during that 10-day period, what happens during that 10-school-day period when you have the disagreement? What happens with the program that that has been proposed by the district?
The things you disagree with are not allowed to continue to proceed, and the things you agreed with can start immediately. That's how I understand what the law says, and of course I'm not an attorney, but as an advocate that's my understanding, and most of the districts that I deal with now are doing just exactly that. They're proceeding with the things that everyone collaborated on and agreed on, and they're postponing the things that they wanted to do that you disagreed with until there's that second meeting.
Right, and you need to give them notice that you agree to have those things implemented, and the things that you don't, you're saying, no, you can't do that. So effectively that 10-day period, it's as if nothing happened. Your proposals are where they were. It's kind of frozen. Actually, when you have a disagreement, there's something called stay put, where you revert back to your last agreed upon IEPs. That's the same kind of thing. It's kind of like a temporary stay put of sorts. So anyway, you've got this 10-day period where theoretically you come back to get additional information to see if you can improve the program or, come to some type of compromise. And then you come back. Okay, now you come back to this 10-day meeting, this 10-day free look, as we call it. What happens when you come back to that 10-day free look meeting, or the 10-day reconvene? What happens at that point?
Well, everybody comes back. You open up the meeting again, and you talk about the things that you found that you may talk about things that you found that support your position. You may have other information, and occasionally even the district will come back with some ideas. In some cases, in a school in the Aldine School District, for instance, that I remember, they came back with a compromise and offered some of what the parent wanted, and it was enough so that she said she wanted to just accept that, because they actually compromised with her and decided that they could do some of what she wanted, but not all of it. And by coming together at a middle ground, they were able to come to an agreement at that meeting. Now, that is, unfortunately, the rarest instance. Sometimes that happens, but most often we come back and the district hasn't changed its position and the parents haven't changed their position, and you remain in disagreement.
Yeah, we all kind of end up looking at each other like, okay, well, what are you going to do? Well, we don't have any new information. You don't have any new information. Oh, well, that was a good use of everybody's time. What happens? So you end up so effectively in that situation, you're at a stalemate, okay? What happens at that point?
Well, there are a number of possibilities. First of all, they're going to ask you to sign a paper waiving your 5-day, you have the right to put off any new implementation for at least 5 days. And if you still disagree with that, then you do not sign that, and they have to continue the old program, the old IEP program that you had agreed with for at least 5 more school days.
Right, and after that point, okay, then what happens? After that 5 school day has passed, then what happens?
Well, they are going to go ahead and implement what it is that they proposed, and if you still disagree with it, there's the possibility of either asking for a mediation for that or the possibility of filing for due process.
Well, okay, so you file for mediation. I don't know that that's something that I normally recommend people to do in that scenario, because you're not in stay put at that point.
I understand that, and yet I do have a parent or two who have actually mediated from that position on their own and gotten some things done. Now, that often doesn't work.
Right. Usually what I find in a mediation scenario, I find it better to go ahead and file for due process. And then then a lot of times school districts will have a conversation about mediating at that point. But I frankly feel like it's a better scenario for both parties to keep their eye on the ball, to know that there could be an adverse decision for either side, to give a motivation to mediate. And usually I find that in the context of due process is a better way to go. And the other part of it is you mediate that doesn't put in stay put. If you have something that is absolutely something that you cannot live with, stay put is something that you should enforce, and the only way you can really do that is by filing for due process. Again, stay put means that they have to revert to the program that was at last agreed upon, and so they cannot move forward until it's either litigated or there's through a hearing, or or there's a mediated or there's some type of settlement. So that's something to be aware of. When I bring on some of my future guests as counsel, I'm going to talk about mediated settlements too, because there are things that you really need to be watching out for when you get into a mediation. But mediation, I will say this in passing though, mediation is a wonderful resource to use. In many cases, most of the time when things are mediated, most of the time people settle their differences. But, a mediated settlement generally means that you don't get everything you want and they don't get everything they want. Frankly, that's the perfect mediation where neither side got everything that they wanted. So, anyway, it's something that, and here in Texas and in most states, the mediation is paid for, the mediator is paid for by the state education agency. So it's a great way to use alternative dispute.
And one other thing I want to get back to, because my nickname is Education Sidney, and also my website. The important thing here is we're instituting due process not because we like to litigate, but because we want your child to be in the setting and in the placement and with the proper IEP, and we don't want things changed until you're ready to agree to those changes. So the idea of using due process for this is to help educate your child, and that's the thing that I find to be the most important thing. I'm looking for a way to get the school and the parents on the same page in such a way that the child actually gets an appropriate public education.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that was wonderful about mediation, too, is as opposed to going to a arbiter or actually a hearing officer, which is like an arbiter, listening to the evidence from both sides and then make a ruling, both sides are thinking together to craft something on their own without having somebody force it on them. And for a lot of times, you can be a lot more creative than having a disinterested, a disinterested hearing officer that is making a determination of how something should settle out. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, I'm going to switch from mediations. Again, we'll talk about that at a future show when I'm going to have several attorneys on over the next couple of months, and we're going to get into that kind of hot and heavy. Frankly, I believe it'll be in October. We'll have Debbie McElvaney and Sharon Ramage on, and that's going to be a really interesting show. I'll post the dates on that, but that'll be really something worthwhile. Okay, let's go to IEEs for a moment and outside independent educational evaluations. Okay, let's talk about that for a moment. When you have an IEE, okay, is the district? The district will give you a list of people. Let's go back. With an IEE, it's assuming that the district performed an evaluation that you disagreed upon. Okay, so if you disagreed on that assessment, okay, you have a right to request an independent at public expense. Okay, so in that scenario, so you're getting effectively a second opinion. And when you do that, the district is going to give you their set of criteria, that including qualifications and and other issues about the type of tests they're supposed to perform, sending a copy of the evaluation to the district, etc. But they're going to give you a list of people to. Give you a list of people that perform these. Do you have to adhere to that list, Sidney?
Actually, sometimes you can adhere to it because they have someone on the list that you actually trust to do those evaluations.
My question was have to. Do you have to?
And of course, on the other side, you can pick someone who isn't on their list but who has the same qualifications as the people that they gave you, in such a way that you're meeting the qualifications the district has for its own evaluators, and at the same time, you're providing someone that you know is independent of the school district and truly independent of the school district. We sometimes find that school districts have people that are inclined to favor the school district as opposed to just being not arbitrary, but fair and just looking for how is the student doing and what is the student's assessment, regardless. And it's important to keep in mind that, again, this is, pardon me, this is trying to find a way to educate the child and make sure that proper accommodations are in place for the child as we go forward with their education.
Right, and what's critical here, and I know we said this a couple of weeks ago when I had Holly at Hurl on, was that you need to be sure that your evaluator does observations at school. It's absolutely critical. Too many of the evaluators only see the child in the clinic. And that can be something that can be used against you in a hearing. Well, that's fine, Dr. Smith, that you see that in your clinic, but that's not what we see at school. So it's absolutely important. But we need to have, but the key here is to have evaluators that are truly independent. There was a Supreme Court decision that was called Schaefer versus West. I know we talked about it before on a previous show, but Schaefer versus West is something that's in Wright's Law. You can look it up. Schaefer versus West. By the way, West is W-E-A-S-T, not E-S-T. E-A-S-T. Anyway, what Schaefer versus West did was really it talked about the importance of the procedural safeguards. And one of the things about the procedural safeguards, it really levels the playing field for the parent. What this particular case was shifting the burden of proof from the from the parents to the school district, because the school district has all the documentation and all the records about the child, so they have an unfair advantage. But the Supreme Court said that, well, the procedural safeguards level the playing field. And one of the things that was said in the majority opinion is that the ability to have an IEE is one of those things that levels the playing fields. And it provides you, by having independent evaluators, the firepower to match the experts of the other side. What does that mean? That can mean to have evaluators that will see the child at school, that will also can attend IEP meetings, and individuals that will also testify to their findings in a hearing. So these are things that are really important. The phrase "to match the firepower" is really the issue. You need to have somebody that truly is independent. If you have somebody that has done, typically they only do them for schools. They're also do a lot of work with schools and do consulting work with schools. Sometimes they may not be the most biased. They may be more biased and less likely to be objective. And all you want is somebody to provide an objective, accurate view of what your child's functioning level is. So having a truly independent evaluator is absolutely key.
And just one little addendum to that, also these independent educational evaluations can sometimes come up with better or additional accommodations or recommendations that the school district itself hadn't thought of. And sometimes it, again, aids in the education of the child simply by providing that second opinion. So it doesn't always result in a complete disagreement. Sometimes it actually results in better accommodations for the child without even having to go to any kind of a due process situation.
That's right. And it's really, really important in this situation to get those evaluators that are independent. But what's important, too, is when you ask for that IEE, I can't overemphasize this point. When you ask for it, the district will invariably ask you why. What is it about the evaluation that the district performed in their full individual evaluation that was faulty? What was it about it? And they have a right to ask you, but you similarly have a right to tell them that thank you, but I'm not required to answer that. Frankly, I would tell people not to divulge that. It's not germane. If anything, if you end up in any type of legal proceeding in a due process, it could actually complicate your position. It could actually compromise your position for counsel that would be speaking on your behalf, because it would box you into the problem. I'm telling people, some very good friends of mine, counsel, have made it very, very clear to me, it's not a good idea. Just say thank you. I'm not required to reply to that, and they cannot use that as a reason to deny that.
And the fact is that on one occasion that I allowed parents went ahead and told why, the district experts immediately in the actual IEP meeting gave testimony as to why the parent was wrong in what she said about that was wrong with her their evaluation. And that becomes something that can be used legally if you do have to go to due process in the future.
Right. So bottom line, I think I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but it's just better to say thank you. I'm not required to do that. Even if they ask you that in writing, in a document, you're not required to do that. And just tell them, say thank you, but I'm not required to do that. Okay, let's talk about delay. Let's talk about delaying when you request an IEE. What kind of delays have we found? What kind of things have you seen? I know I've seen some things. What have you seen?
Well, as a matter of fact, just recently I have a current case where that's ongoing and has been ongoing for several months, and we've gone back and forth, and the district does things like they aren't working on Friday, or they didn't get the request, or they haven't finished thinking about it. And then after that, they then send out the list, and the parent picks someone not on the list, and the district immediately delayed sending the contracting information to the professional. And then after they delayed sending the contracting information, then they said that the district could get it done by any LSSP for $600, and this person was asking for more than that, and they weren't going to pay more than that. So this is actually ongoing at the moment, and what's happening is we're being delayed. Now, I know school isn't in session, and this particular evaluation would have to be done at the school, so we still have a little time. But meanwhile, we're far apart on what the price of this evaluation should be, and we're still in the process. But these are just the kinds of delays, and sometimes they mislay the paperwork, or they can't find it, or the person you need to talk to isn't available, and it can go on 6 months.
How long has this particular scenario been going on?
Well, we put in the request for this to occur toward the end of September of the following school year, back in April or May of last school year.
Oh, I want to know the name of this district. Tell me what district this is.
Well, I'm kind of not wanting to do that on the air, but the thing is that these are the kinds of things that we run into, and I kind of hate to bring up their name, but since we have this show, their name is they're very humble. Let's put it that way. They're very humble people.
I got it. Okay. Parents assume that the schools know what they're doing. Let's talk about that.
Well, let's start with this, and I promise you, any current active duty elementary school teacher will deny this. And when they retire, and you talk to them like a year after they retire, they'll be very happy to tell you that most elementary school teachers don't know how a child learns to read and can't teach it. The best response I've ever gotten from a teacher in that situation was, it's all rote. And that's about all they can say. They really don't know how to teach reading. And that's somewhat basic to education, being able to read. So this goes all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, about you not having to accept dates and times. The truth is you should not assume that the professional educators are the professionals in the situation. The best teacher on earth is the child's parent, usually the mother. And they're the ones who know the most about what's happening to the child among everyone at the school and everyone at home. So we need to keep in mind, don't assume that they said it, so they must know what they're doing.
Yeah, we're going to have a show dedicated solely to reading coming up here soon. So I don't really want to go into it that deep today. I will say this, a lot of times districts think that they can fix it with a computerized program, and invariably it doesn't work. It doesn't fix the problem. So, we're going to have a show that's going to be talking about methodologies and really explore how kids read, and that'll be in October. So be listening for that. And actually, I think Sidney will be on with me with that, and we're going to have a special guest for that.
Well, and if we were on a YouTube channel right now or a Facebook channel, you could see me roll my eyes when Lewis was talking, because it's just amazing.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to, let's talk about data. Talking about data in the IE process. How important is data, and how should we be using this? And let's just talk about in general and talking about a child's progress.
Well, we've now gone to an IEP meeting. We've put an education plan in place for this child, an individual education plan in place. And then the district is going to send you on some basis a report, usually at least every 6 or 9 weeks, of the progress that's being made on that IEP. And the particular parts of the IEP that they may be referencing may be a reading goal or a writing goal or a mathematics goal. And they're going to tell you on this report that your child is doing what they're asking him to do 50% of the time, and the goal was to do 80% of the time. And right now he's at 50 and he's making adequate progress. Well, I can write that down on a report without ever knowing the child. I don't need to be in the room at all in order to write up that report. So what we're talking about here is the raw data, the kind of data I took when I had a child on an IEP in my classroom, where I used sticky notes and stuck them to my shirt so that I would know that Johnny, who was supposed to learn to answer what questions, answered a what question for me, and that this was one of the trials that we're going to use to see if he's making progress in this area. And I would stick his name on that sticky note. I would stick a brief note to myself about what he had done, and then during an off period, I'd take all the sticky notes that would be stuck to me about these various children or in my pockets, and I would list them with tally marks to show whether they successfully answered the what question or unsuccessfully answered it. And then I would use those tally marks to create that data where I said that the child was able to answer a what question 50% of the time. Now when the parent comes to me and says, well, that's very good, could you show me your raw data? I could pull out a sheet of tally marks on their child and show them those tally marks and the dates of those tally marks, and if need be, I could pull out the sticky note that I used to make that note, so that I had all kinds of ways of backing up that percentage that were not dependent on me just sitting down and writing a number. And what we find, unfortunately, is often children are listed as being able to do something and mastering something that they can't do at all. but we've got data, according to them, that shows that they did do it. Well, if they're supposed to do it 80% of the time, and you ask for data at a IEP meeting, and they can't produce anything except that number, there's no telling whether they did it or not.
Yeah. I want to move on to requesting the child's records. How important is that?
Well, if you want to be fully informed, you need to have documentation of what's been going on, and the school district is required to keep documentation about your child available to you either to view or to have copies of. And you send in, we call it a FERPA request. Lewis maybe can remember what that acronym stands for.
That's the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act. Family Educational Rights Privacy Act.
And that's a federal law, and it says that you have a right to the educational records of your child in a timely fashion, and if necessary, at some expense, but not at an unreasonable expense.
Right,
so
and that's everything with your child's name on it, or your name on it, for that matter.
And they're allowed to redact other children who might appear on some of that material, but they do have to send you a complete file. One little note that I tell my parents when they get that file, the first thing they need to do is put it in date order, because the districts often send you duplicates because they have duplicates in more than one place. So they send you duplicates. If you put it in date order, then you can weed out things that are duplicated, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 times.
Right. Let's talk about predetermination.
Well, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, because legally, as I understand it, you're not allowed to predetermine the results as a school district of an IEP meeting before the IEP meeting occurs. And I personally have been in many public school of one kind or another IEP pre-meetings with the school district that told us what was going to happen, and we were just to agree to it. And that's part of my qualification. I've sat in those meetings, and I know, not that they're always occurring, but they do occur. And you want to be on your guard for it, looking like in the meeting that when you got there, they'd already decided what they were going to do before you ever arrived.
And a lot of times documentation can show you that happen. If you got into a hearing, a lot of hearing officers will really have a major problem about predetermination if you can prove that. So that is a huge issue. If you can find it from a way to show that was already decided prior to that meeting, that's a big problem, major big problem, because it's supposed to be done as a committee of people that know the child based on the data that come together, and you are a stakeholder every bit as much as they are, and you are entitled to be involved in that decision making. Let's briefly touch on the Delphi method.
Well, since my bachelor's degree is in communication, we used to call it speech. One of the courses I took was small group discussion. And the Delphi method, although I don't know that it had that name at the time, was a way of getting a small group of people, like, say, an IEP committee, to make a decision when a decision has to be made. For one reason or another, whether it's life and death or education or no education, we need a decision to be made. And it's a method of getting people primarily in situations like NASA goes through when something's going wrong on one of their space explorations. It's something where you have to make a decision regardless of the fact that you don't want to. What that has morphed into in IEP meetings is it's become a way of isolating the parents so that they look like the only fool in the room and making you feel intimidated. And if you know what's going on, it's easier to resist it and say, look, you can make me feel stupid, but that's too bad. I'm still going to be disagreeing with you. It's important that you do that, and often parents, frankly, have had to hire someone like me or like Lewis to be that person in the room that doesn't care that they're being made to look like a fool because we know better.
Yeah, so the key here is in fact, I think I originally told you about the Delphi, or at least I pointed out that they were doing that in schools. The antidote to the Delphi method is know that you're being Delphied and resist. Resistance is not futile.
Well, as a matter of fact, that's the thing. When we were studying it in my graduate level class in communication, it wasn't a method of making people feel stupid. It was a method of getting people that had to make a decision right now to make a decision.
Right. Okay, we're getting toward the end here. Okay, I want you to talk about education, Sidney. I want to talk about what you do, and how, in terms of how it can help kids that may have some learning problems, that may have ADHD issues. Let's talk about that.
Well, my practice as a tutor, educationsydney.com, pardon me, I'm a professional tutor and I'm a certified teacher in addition to being an advocate. I work with primarily underperforming students whose families know that they could be performing way above the level they are, but they just aren't performing. And often I find, as I've gone through my practice now, starting on my 16th, 17th, and 18th students this year, that they often have at least some ADHD. Sometimes they have a slow processing problem. Sometimes they have both of those together. They often do find themselves to be comorbid. I use many techniques with these children. I sit with them and I'll ask a question and skip a beat or two, sometimes three, so that they have a chance to think of what the answer to that question would be. And in addition to that, here's the big thing that was pointed out to me by a good friend of mine, Jack Berry. What differentiates my practice as a tutor from everybody else is that as I use the subjects I teach as a kind of legal tender to get them motivated to work with me because I'm helping them improve my grades, I get into their heads and teach them by experience how to do the work themselves. My goal is in 2 or 3 years to fire myself like Nanny McPhee, because when you want me but do not need me, I have to leave. When the student is doing his or her own work, I become an expensive friend, and I tell the parents to please drop my services.
So talk a bit some more about, with a kid with ADHD, some of the things that you might do.
Well, one of the things that I do with children that have ADHD is I encourage the parents and the students to come up with a fidget. And I even encourage the school they attend to allow them that fidget as long as it's not distracting to them or other students. And by a fidget, I mean maybe one of these funny little smiley face dolls that you can twist the limbs, and they can just be playing with that, because I find that if they occupy their ADHD with that movement with the fidget, they still are able to pay attention to what they're supposed to be learning. And if they can't do something else at the time that they're learning, they're just going to go off and lose themselves. They lose their focus. So I allow them a fidget, and I'm not bashful about telling them that one that attracts too much of their attention or makes noise is not acceptable, and they have to find another fidget. One of the children that I'm working with now has this thing where he twirls his pen in his fingers. And I've gotten used to it now. It doesn't bother me. And he can answer questions way better while he's twirling a pen than if he's not twirling a pen. It sort of takes him out of his ADHD-ness, if you would. And it's just an amazing thing to see. And frankly, I don't care. As long as I can see his eyes and I'm getting the answers, I really don't care what he's doing.
That's cool. Do you have any additional parting thoughts about, what you're doing with Education Sidney, or as an advocate, things that parents need to be aware of?
Well, I think in both practices, the main thing is the key to everything is the parents. They're the ones that have to be involved. They're the ones that have to be willing to spend the time and to show the student that they are spending the time. Particularly in the Education Sidney practice, they have to be willing to be there. Because when the child sees the parent there while they're studying, they see that there's actual time being allocated by the parent for them, and that often has a big influence on their abilities.
Okay. We're getting down toward the end of the show today. Just a couple of things. Thanks, Sidney, for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's actually my pleasure.
I'm going to have Sidney on again in the future. He's going to be my official guest host whenever possible. So, you'll hear his voice sometimes as well as mine. Just a couple of things. I had said on the get-go of this show when I first started that I wasn't going to do any school district bashing. Well, I'm going to retreat from that a little bit. If I see administrators that are not doing the right things to kids and that are truly not playing by the rules, I'm actually going to call people out on this show. I don't have any problem doing that. I'll call out districts. I'll call out individuals. I will do that. Now, I always will be professional about it, but I'm just going to tell you all right now, if y'all are rude, if you're not treating parents as equal stakeholders, if you're not playing by the rules, well, guess what? Louis Geigerman is going to call you out. If you don't want to do it, if you don't want to be on the radio, don't do it. Okay, let's talk one more time. I want to remind people about the Dream League. I want you guys to call KUHT switchboard. I prefer to do it on Monday when somebody's there. They're not there on the weekends, but I want you to call the switchboard at 713-748-8888. That's 713-748-8888. Also send them an email at houstonpublicmedia.org/contact. That's houstonpublicmedia.org/contact. By the way, this show is also available on the website at cypressradio.org. Go to the tab On Air. Go to my name. The show is archived and podcast. If you want to share this with any of your friends, please tell your friends about this show. We want every single listserv that you're on to let people know about it because we're trying to give important information to our families. Finally, next week, Peter Simone will be our guest, the neuropsychologist in the field of in dealing with testing kids. It's going to be a fascinating show. We're going to explore executive functioning, diagnosing emotional disturbances, and specific learning disabilities. It's going to be a phenomenal, incredibly interesting guy. Please send me your questions to spedradio103.5 at gmail.com. That's spedradio103.5 at gmail.com. Well, this another week. We've done another week. I hope you all will come back and listen next week from Cypress. Have a great week. I'll see you on the radio.
KCYBLP 103.5 FM is Cypress Radio. Cypress.